Good morning. This is Business Morning. Welcome and thank you for joining us. I'm Chimeze Obi Iwago. The Federal Executive Council meeting has approved the revised 2021 to 2023 medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper at its virtual meeting. The virtual meeting, which was presided over by President Muhammadu Buhari at the Council chamber of the State House, approved a 12.66 trillion naira budget for each of the 3 fiscal years. The meeting also touched on other national issues. Let's take a listen.
The meeting started with the council observing a minute of silence for Nigeria's former Minister of Works, late Major General John Obada, who died on Saturday, June the 13th, 2020. After over 8 hours of deliberations, State House correspondents are briefed on the proceedings, beginning with the council's approval of a national policy on waste management.
All of these are sources of creating wealth, from waste to wealth, and sources of jobs. So not only it will provide the environmental quality, but also the economic improvement and the livelihood of the people.
The 2021 to 2023 medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper was approved by the council, and the Minister of State for Finance explains its key parameters and projected revenues for the country.
For 2020, it was 5.84 trillion. But for 2021, we expect that it will be 7.50 trillion. Even though the oil production is much lower than our capacity, because we are restricted by the OPEC plus quota in order to get the pricing high.
Schools will remain closed, according to the Minister of State for Education.
We are not confident yet that everywhere is safe. The numbers from NCDC are still very alarming, and we had put this in front of parents and all the stakeholders in the ministry. WAEC, on its own part, is also negotiating with other West African countries to look at possible shifts in dates.
The Minister of Humanitarian Affairs breaks down the school feeding program, stating that it is still in progress in some states, even with the COVID-19 pandemic.
We have successfully done that in FCT, Lagos, and Ogun State. Discussions are still ongoing with the remaining states to see how we can continue with this program. We were thinking that schools will open before now, but now that schools are not going to reopen, we have opened up the discussions with the state governors.
The medium-term expenditure framework and fiscal strategy paper will now be sent to the National Assembly for passage. Projections by the Ministry of Finance are that the years 2021, 2022, and 2023 will see an increased budget size of about 12.66 trillion naira. Kayla Megwa, Channels Television News.
And Nigeria's former finance minister and former managing director of the World Bank, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, has been speaking on her plans for the World Trade Organization if she gets the top job at the WTO. Dr. Okonjo-Iweala spoke at the WTO headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland, and said if she is elected Director General, she would ensure that the United States remain in the fold of the global trade body. Asked how she hopes to cope with the role of trade negotiations, Dr. Okonjo-Iweala says her experience in the financial world will come in handy in the new role.
Madam, I'm Angela. I'm a journalist from ChinaSender.com. I have one question for you. I know you are a financial expert, but you never participate directly in a trade negotiation. Do you think that you will be challenged for not being a proper trade expert in this competition? And what advantages do you think you can bring as a financial expert in this perspective? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think that's a totally wrong notion. And you know, I've paid respect to my competitors because that's my nature. I don't criticize other people, I respect them. Competitors who have been saying that she's not a trade expert, they're wrong. I'm a development economist. And you cannot do that without looking at trade. Trade is a central part of development. So I've been doing it my whole career at the World Bank. I was working on trade policy reform in middle and low-income countries at the bank. As finance minister, The customs service in my country reported to me, and that's all about trade facilitation. I helped my country's negotiations with my trade minister on the ECOWAS common external tariffs. I don't know how much more trade you can have than that. So those who say I don't have trade, they're mistaken. I think the qualities I have are even better because I combine development economics with trade, knowledge, along with finance. And you need those combinations of skills to lead the WTO. So I think I have the skills that are needed. So this is a familiar territory to me, not an alien one. I'm a trade person.
In the meantime, candidates vying to lead the 164 member countries World Trade Organization say a quick decision needs to be reached to avoid a deep crisis as it began vetting process to replace Brazil's Roberto Azevedo, who will step down a year early at the end of August. The nominations from 8 countries have been submitted after 2 months of campaigning, which will be followed by a final decision by consensus. While addressing the WTO members yesterday in Geneva, Nigeria's candidate, Dr. Ngozi Okonjo-Iweala, who is a front runner in the race, says she hoped members would make a quick decision as the world was at an uncertain juncture due to the COVID-19 pandemic. Beginning from August 1, deposit money banks will now debit bank accounts of chronic loan defaulters. What means is that if you owe in bank, a year debt can be set off against your account balance in Bank B. Now, the Central Bank of Nigeria issued the Global Standing Instruction GSI guidelines, and this is aimed at reducing non-performing loans in the banking sector and to monitor chronic loan defaulters. To help us bring this to perspective is the President, Institute for Governance, Risk Management and Compliance Professionals, Dr. Emmanuel Abolo. Dr. Abolo is also the Director General, the Economic Think Tank Center. Thank you very much, Dr. Abolo, for joining us on the show. All right, Dr. Abolo, what do you make of the CBN's GSI guidelines for banks, and how apt is it at a time like this?
Thank you very much. I would say that this is a policy in the right direction. I wholly support it, and some of us have been advocating for this for many years back. Let me say this, that the Bankers Committee have done a very good job in saying that the Global Standing Instruction should be effective from August 1, 2020. What that simply means is that if you are a debtor in one bank, the bank, that is a creditor bank, has a right of set off from any of your account balances, investments, whether savings account or domiciliary accounts or investments in other banks. So they have a right of set off. So it is not a case of the old set off whereby the bank only has recourse to the balances which you have with that particular creditor bank. So what has happened, it is now a global. That means the entire banking system, wherever you have balances, if you are owing a bank, Bank A for instance, that Bank A has a right to offset off from any account balances or investments in other banks. This is very laudable, and I commend the Bankers Committee and the Central Bank for this noble initiative.
Now, how do you see this impacting the banking industry's non-performing loans ratio?
Well, first of all, what are the key objectives of this global standing instruction? There are 3 key objectives, and the last one has to say, it says that it is aimed at reducing incidence of non-performing loans in the Nigerian banking system. Well, I'm not quite sure that this single policy alone will be able to achieve that, because the policy applies only to individual accounts. It does not apply to corporate accounts. And corporate accounts, they make up the most significant, even not more than, it should be up to 80% of total banking loans. So the policy only applies to individual banks, and I think that is just a tokenism as far as I'm concerned. And of course, we are going to talk about the unintended consequences of this action. So I'm not quite sure, but the first two objectives of engendering an improved credit payment culture, yes, it will help to do that. Watch list of consistent loan defaulters, it would also help. But my fear is that it may not be able to reduce the incidence of non-performing loans in the Nigerian banking system because it does not apply to corporate lenders. Of course, if the bankers committee or the central bank decides to unveil the corporate entity, that is, you open up the corporate entity and see who the real owners of the companies are, and then also target those individuals. Otherwise, this is just a tokenism. It will not be able to reduce the issue of non-performing loans in the banking industry to a significant extent.
All right, Doctor, let's talk about these unintended consequences. You did mention that. Yes, we have looked at what the central bank is trying to achieve here. So, but what are some of these unintended consequences that probably would arise from this policy?
Thank you very much. There is what we call announcement effect in economics, announcement effect. Now, this policy has been on the drawing board since maybe May 2019, May. So those who are chronic defaulters in the banking system are already aware that this policy is on its way. So if you are a chronic defaulter, what are you going to do? They would have started closing their accounts. That's almost 1 year. They would have started closing their personal accounts. They would have started shutting down their investments. And then what is going to happen is that they may decide to open accounts in the names of their wives, in the names of their children, in the names of cronies. So you are not likely to get balances of any of these chronic defaulters for you to have a setup. So that is one unintended consequences. Many of these individuals would have been closing their accounts. So what I expected was that as soon as they decided to be crafting this policy, they ought to have given instruction that none of these defaulters balances should be tampered with. They ought to have been, what you call, you would have put a stop on that. So that is one unintended consequence. The other one is the issue of dispute resolution. Of course, these customers have contract with their respective banks. And for instance, also, if the creditor, if the lending bank decides to trigger the global standing instruction, and it was triggered wrongly, and because the implementation may be very rough at the beginning, there will be a lot of disputes, and that will take many banks to court, and that is going to that is one unintended consequence. So how is that going to be addressed? The other point is it that we're going to be establishing credit courts or dispute tribunals, because a lot of disputes are going to arise between banks and these very customers. So those are the unintended consequences. Then the final point is that these individuals may no longer be, they may decide to move their funds around. They may decide to move their funds around, and that is going to have some implications on the banking system.
All right, Doctor. Now, recently, the central bank, was talking about allowing banks restructure loans because of this COVID-19 pandemic effect. So, why is this policy important now? What happens to loan restructuring and amortization for the borrowers? And of course, given that the minimal rate of non-performing loan ratio at this time?
Thank you. That's a very good question. Let me say this, that restructuring of loans has always been a resolution mechanism, for bad loans. What does it mean to restructure? It means you change the structure of the loan. And what are the key elements of this structure? The original structure could be that they are lending to you at a particular interest rate. That is part of the structure. Then, of course, the tenure or the maturity of the loan, the tenure of the loan, and then, of course, other elements of the loan agreement. So when you want to when you request for restructuring, you are simply saying you want to provide a leeway to enable the customer to be able to pay up. So for the past 5 months, many companies have not been in business, and I happen to fall into that particular category. They have not been in business, so they have not earned any money. So how are they going to pay this money? So one key aspect is to extend the moratorium and also extend the tenure. So if it was 8 years loan, you could just shift it to, like, let's say, like 10 years loan instead of 8 years, and then the interest rate as well can also be looked at, and other elements of the total loan activity. So restructuring is very good, and I urge the Central Bank of Nigeria to fully support it, because otherwise we are going to have a lot of non-performing loans, and that is going to have serious effect on liquidity position of banks. So it's a very good policy, and it's one that should be embraced by the Central Bank of Nigeria.
Now, if I may ask, Doctor, where is the credit bureau in all of these policy? I mean, the GSI policy, their role seems to have been neglected in this.
Well, it is not a question of being neglected. It is a question of why were credit bureaus set up. They were set up to provide information to lending banks, commercial banks. So before you lend money to a bank, the law requires that every commercial bank must sign on to at least 2 credit bureaus. What is the purpose of that? You need to assess the 2 credit bureaus and get information on the customer who has approached you for a loan, to see whether the customer is owing other banks. Not just that, what is the status of the loan that they are owing? Now, if the information provided shows that the customer is owing a bank and that the loan is not performing, what that means is that under the prudential guidelines, the bank cannot and must not give a loan to that particular customer. So they were set up for that purpose. For this GSI, it is NIBS, Nigeria Interbank Settlement System, that has the custody of all BN of customers, of all customers bank customers in Nigeria. They also hold records of all bank accounts in Nigeria. So the GSI is maintained by NIBS. So credit bureau, they have nothing to do here. They don't really have anything to do here. The ask is to provide information to banks when they want to lend to a customer. These two are different.
All right, Dr. Abolo, in all of these, what is the outlook now for the banking industry in terms of non-performing loans?
I will say very, very emphatically that the outlook is a bit grim. I'm not just sounding alarmist, and it is not their fault. It has to do with exogenous factors beyond the control of everybody. It's not only Nigeria, but also America, every part of the world. You have stopped all the supply chain. So every that banks just opened quite recently, so no one has capacity to pay back any loan. The only saving grace is for the central bank and the government to inject liquidity into the banking system, so that we do not witness, massive bank failures. But I am not saying there will be bank failures, because I had already made a YouTube a video showing that no banks will fail in Nigeria. But of course, it is dependent on what the Central Bank of Nigeria does and what the federal government does. They need to inject funds into bank liquidity. It is not the fault of these banks. It is not the fault of anyone. So if banks are not to fail, Central Bank must wake up to save this bank from the imminent problems.
All right, thank you very much, Dr. Emmanuel Abolo. Thank you for your time. Dr. Abolo is the President of the Institute for Governance, Risk Management and Compliance Professional, and of course the Director General of the Economic Think Tank Center. We'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we'll look at some developments in the world of commodities. And for commodities market update, I'm being joined by Temitope Olubile, research analyst with Financial Derivatives Company. Hello, Tope. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning.
Well, looking at one of your burning economic issues there, we're talking about cement. Yeah, with Rwanda now in the market. Yeah, Nigeria, of course, is the leader when we talk about cement production with Dangote, at the top. Now, with Rwanda joining now in cement production, what would that mean for cement production in Africa and even for, Nigeria in particular?
Okay, so we have that, Rwanda is kind of slacking in terms of cement production. So now they have, a new entrant, making it a total of 2 players in the Rwanda market. And we see that, the plan for these new entrants is to churn out about 600,000 tons of cement and, boost employment by about 600 new jobs. And, so we have that is going to, and with this, they hope to, reduce the importation of cement from, neighboring countries. And talking about Nigeria, we all are aware of how, Dangote cement, turned around our fortune, basically, in terms of that commodity. We went from a major importer of this commodity, and now we're exporting the commodity, right?
Yeah, so what if Rwanda now is coming in with this, Dangote, you talked about, is exporting clinker. So what would that now mean?
So of course, we have that, some, Dangote plays in, different African countries, and, sometimes it's bordering on, the Rwandan country. And we see that, the plan is to reduce importation of other cement exporters, right? So we have that would affect Dangote in terms of what it is able to import into the Rwandan market. That could, reduce, its
export into the Rwandan market?
To export, rather, into the Rwandan market. So basically, with Rwanda trying to reduce their imports, that would affect exportation of, our key players like Dangote, like we said, into the Rwandan market, and that could affect their fortunes.
And with this, what is the outlook for the cement industry in Africa?
Okay.
And of course, in Nigeria.
Okay, so we have that, we see that the cement price in Nigeria has been stable, irrespective of, our ever-increasing headline inflation rates. And, that is a number of factors, because we see that there's that slack demand, because first is the raining season, and then secondly, with the COVID-19 pandemic, we don't know the construction of new properties is likely to decline, seeing as the real estate market is now going to experience a new normal. So we see that there's that reason for that stable price. And going forward, as we leave the raining season, there could be a pickup in construction activities, and that could pick up.
And we're likely going to see. Are we likely going to see the price of cement come down, perhaps?
With the pickup in demand, it usually leads to a pickup in, prices, right? So the stability in cement prices could be, we could go to a vulnerable cement price and unstable cement price as we go into the dry season and construction activities pick up.
Okay, you also noted that copper is enjoying pandemic rally. How so? What's driving the price of copper?
Okay, so copper is a commodity that markets look at to determine the health of manufacturing sector, which ultimately then determines the growth, global growth, because copper is a key industrial commodity used in manufacturing, and we have that China is one of the main importers of refined copper, right? And we see that China just recently, they announced that they're the first major economy to report a growth even in the middle of the pandemic. Their Q2 growth was positive from a contraction of -6.8%. So that shows that there is that increased activity in China. We also see that there was a record purchase of US corn. So their activities in China are starting to pick up, and we have that is reflecting in copper price, because so that's showing the markets that there is a pickup in China's activities, and China is one of the major economies of the world. So that is hopeful for global growth.
Yeah, with this surge, so there's this optimism for economic
global growth, recovery in global growth.
Okay, all domestic airports are now open for business. What would that mean for domestic commodities supply?
Yes. So we see that all except one is open, and they opened yesterday, July 15th, right? So we see that there's that increased trade activities. There's trade, even though the load factors is still low, because the economy is starting to go to a new normal. Business travel, there's that leisure travel, all of that is out because people are still afraid of contracting the
Absolutely.
virus, right? But in terms of trade, there's going to be that free flow of trade. And, when there's no more that restriction of, getting your produce from one end to the other end. So there's that free flow. Logistics is easier. And, we'll see that would increase the supply of domestic commodities. And ultimately, we hope that would bring down commodity prices.
Okay, let's look at the stock market. The index, of course, has been, I don't know, going
volatile.
Yes, absolutely. And yesterday we saw some kind of marginal gain. Well, the consumer goods subsector, of course, remains subdued.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
what's the reason for this?
So we see that we have that volatile stock market, and just yesterday we saw it creep up a bit. But ahead of the earnings seasons, we are having more companies. We're having some companies release some earnings warnings in terms of giving warnings to investors about what the impact of COVID-19 will be on their on their balance sheets, and we see that is going to. So that bullish trend we're seeing now may not be sustained as we get closer to the earnings season. Because this will be the first report we're getting where the full impact of the COVID-19 pandemic and the lockdown restrictions and contraction in economic activities is going to reflect on the corporate earnings, and that is so the bullish trend.
How do you think the companies in the consumer goods sector and even the industrial goods, how do you see their performance by the time they release their results?
Okay, so we'll have to look at what happened in Q2. Consumer goods, right, is consumers, and whatever happens to their income in that review quarter is what will reflect in your turnover and ultimately your profit. So we see that in Q2 was when we had, lockdown restrictions. First of all, there was that reduced demand, except it's essential, you are not buying, because you don't know, there's uncertainty about your job security, there's uncertainty about your earning capacity. So if it's only essential commodities, we saw that consumers really purchased in that quarter. And, with the declining disposable income, there's going to be a significant reduction in consumer goods sectors, their profitability, because really, if you don't have the income, you're not going to purchase it. So I foresee, reduced income across, most consumer goods companies.
All right, let's look at what's happening in global market. OPEC, of course, and its allies yesterday agreed to scale back oil production.
Yes, they did.
So what would that mean? Not just for the global oil market itself, but for Nigeria, talking about our production and, of course, our price.
Yeah, so we saw that, yesterday the OPEC Plus, we agreed to scale back its output cost to 7.7 million barrels per day. But, so that's taking about, 2 million barrels per day off. That's actually adding 2 million barrels per day into the market, right, from 9.7 million barrels per day. Well, if you see, there are countries like Nigeria, Iraq, that are still making up for their, inability to keep up with their quota. So effectively, the total that would be into the market would be about 8.1, 8.3 million barrels per day, not the 7, because when you have those countries scale back on their own production. So we see that Nigeria was still called out yesterday, and we still have making up to do for our non-compliance, and that is going to affect our production. And for June, we saw that we produced 1.5 million barrels per day, according to OPEC, but they're still not at 1.4, which we need to be. So we're going to see that reduced production.
So by August, when perhaps they have to scale back this, is Nigeria likely going to cut back 1.4?
Yes, we are going to have to, at least closer to 1.4. And we see that we're already moving closer and closer from 1.7, 1.6, 1.8 that we're doing. We're going closer to 1.4, and we're going to have to get there in August so that we can comply and keep up with our quota.
Okay, let's look at the week. How would you say the domestic commodity space have fared in the week, and what's the outlook?
Okay, so we're seeing that, airports, we're going to see that effect on, flow of domestic commodities as we have opened all airports except one yesterday. So we're going to see that is going to reduce commodity prices. And we think that, planting season. There are some commodities that are in their planting season. There are some that, the rain, the excessive rain is affecting is going to affect their harvest, as we go into the harvest season. So we're seeing that though it's a balancing act of, the free flow of, goods as we open airports and the planting season and the adverse effect is rainfall is going to have on commodity prices. So we expect, by and large, we expect a reduced commodity prices across board because of the free flow of goods.
All right, we'll see how that goes. Thank you, Tope, for your
Mary.
time. Temi Tope Oluvile is one of the research analysts with Financial Derivatives Company. In the meantime, oil prices slipped this morning after OPEC and allies such as Russia agreed to ease record supply curves from August, though the drop was cautioned by hopes for a swift U.S. demand pickup after a bigger than expected drawdown from the country's crude stocks. Brent crude fell 13 cents at $43.66 a barrel, and U.S. West Texas Intermediate crude dropped 18 cents to $41.02 a barrel. They rose 2% the previous day, helped by the U.S. crude inventories. The Organization of the Petroleum Exporting Countries and its allies, known as OPEC Plus, agreed on Wednesday to scale back oil production cuts from August as the global economy slowly recovers from the coronavirus pandemic. OPEC Plus has been cutting output since May by 9.7 million barrels per day, or about 10% of global supply. But from August, cuts will officially taper to 7.7 million barrels per day until December. Data from the Energy Information Administration showed U.S. crude inventories fell 7.5 million barrels last week, shrinking much more than the 2.1 million barrels drop expected by analysts. And for review of Wednesday's trading activities at the equities market, here is Temple. Temple, Tope says that marginal gain yesterday is not sustainable.
No, it's not sustainable. I mean, we should say thank you to Airtel Africa, for the gain that they brought to the market yesterday. That was the only reason why we were able to record some gains yesterday. Don't forget, Chimeze, that, of course, Airtel Africa is a major name in the market. It's one of the top 3 or top 4 securities that you have in the Nigerian stock exchange in terms of market capitalization, which falls in trillion naira. So let's look at how we performed yesterday. Yes, 0.06%. That translated to some 8.2 billion naira. On the equity capitalization in terms of gain, we still remain below the 13 trillion naira mark in the market. And of course, that's still because we've been seeing so much of speculative performance in the market lately. Very, very speculative from folks that are putting some cobbles on ground, and we're waiting to be able to see an increase in this cobble to a naira, and then they can exit the market. Look at the volume of transaction. Not so impressive yesterday. It was flat. Basically, some 3 basis points gain yesterday, but 208.21 million, which is similar to what we did in the preceding trading session. And of course, we know that Sterling Bank, for the 3rd time in a row, is coming up as the top traded security. Yesterday, the president on Monday it had done some 78 million units, and of course on Tuesday it did some 78 million. Yesterday it did 77 million units for similar amount. Value of the transaction on Monday was 98 million naira. On Tuesday was 98 or 99, but we saw an increase to some 99 million naira plus yesterday in terms of the volume of transactions. That is a major security to watch in the markets, because again, folks are seemingly interested. Yesterday, it actually gained some 2.48% to contribute to what we have in this space. But I should also add that lately we've been seeing so much of cross-dealing in the market. Some folks are buying in, some are exiting, perhaps they're getting tired of being on the board of one company and they're making move to other companies in the market. Look at the value of transaction. We got some inputs from MTN yesterday, but that didn't change the price. There was no price movement on MTN. That contributed to what we have in this space yesterday. Of course, value of transaction was up by some 66% yesterday. But if you check out what we have in the deals, was a decline, 3,648 compared to the 4,000 plus that we did in at the preceding trading session. In terms of the sectoral performance, the banking space, we saw some bargain hunting in this space yesterday. Zenith Bank was up by some 0.9%. I mentioned earlier that Sterling Bank was also also up. Of course, GT Bank also had some bargain hunting yesterday, was up by some 0.9% too in the market. That's put together gave us the 0.37%. But if you look at the major names that we have under the consumer goods sector, as Chimize and Temitope had earlier discussed, a lot of the consumer goods sector, major names, Honeywell, Flour Mill, PZ, 3.3% decline yesterday. And of course, a couple of other companies that you have in that space. That's translated to some declines that we have in the consumer goods space, 1.39% yesterday. Industrial goods side of the market, it was a flat day for them, 0.01%. Anambra-based Kiotics actually made some gains, some 7% in terms of the addition to what we saw yesterday, and gave us this performance. Insurance space, we got some serious activities between the bulls and the bears yesterday. We got one of the key names actually making some 10% gain in that space. But if you put the 9% loss on linkage assurance plus the 9% loss that we also had on Wapik Insurance, it translated to the 0.89% decline that we have in this space yesterday. Oil and gas, no movement. Everyone is still waiting for deregulation in this space. Nothing to show for this space yesterday in the market. That's not very impressive. Folks are then beginning to move to other sides of the market. We have on the phone now Mr. David Adonri, who is a stockbroker with High Cap Securities. Okay, we do expect that he will join us much later on the program. But let's move on now and look at the NASD OTC Securities Exchange. This is one space that folks are watching lately. Look at the NSI, which is the NASD Securities Index. Look at the performance yesterday. It was down 0.27%. That tells you that there's some profits taking going on in this space, 0.27%, but you have the psychological mark still hovering around the 711.89 points for the market. The market value, market capitalization is still up, 522.93 billion naira. But let's look at the volume of transaction. Volume yesterday was 291,000. I'm hoping it was being millions, or 291,387 units of shares traded yesterday. A larger percentage of this figure, 280,000, actually went to CSCS, which is the Central Securities Clearing System. That's the market depository that actually gave some 100 million naira worth of CSR out yesterday. There's a press statement to that effect, actually, all in the name of cushioning the effects that we have of COVID-19. So folks are still bullish on this particular company. But basically, there was some profits taken that gave us what we have here yesterday. The 0.27% decline yesterday, there was the profits taken was on WAMCO, which is Friesland Wamco Campina. Yesterday, it actually opened at 121 naira 96 kobo and declines to 121 naira 4 kobo in the market, and that's the reason why we had this decline in the markets yesterday. You have a couple of other transactions in the market, because basically we had 12 deals on this space yesterday, and of course in total we saw a value of 5.62 million naira in the space yesterday. But basically this profit taking was what actually reduced the activity level in the market yesterday, because that was actually close to 100% in terms of performance in the market. So folks are watching this space, and of course that's where those that have actually positioned themselves before now are now enjoying and cashing out. Chimaze.
So watching. Thank you, Temple. Hang in there. We'll take a break. We'll do a quick call to London, and then we'll get back to you.
Sure.
And for updates from the streets of London, let's bring in Juliana now. Good morning, Juliana. Well, the British Chambers of Commerce says 29% of businesses in a survey of 7,400 firms plan to cut the size of their workforce in the next 3 months as the government prepares to wind down its furlough scheme. In other words, the rate of joblessness in the UK as a result of this pandemic is not yet reflected, right?
Well, it is reflected, Chimaze. Good morning. We have had the UK employment figures in. It's not good reading for the government, because what the Office for National Statistics data shows us is that since the lockdown, 649,000 people have lost their jobs. Last month alone, 74,000 people lost their jobs. And really, it's because of the government's furlough scheme, that scheme we keep talking about, which is basically the Treasury paying for people's wages, paying people to literally stay at home, that is coming to an end. So at the moment, that's keeping unemployment pretty much leveled at 3.9%. But once that does taper off in October, we are expecting mass redundancies. Again, just last month, 74,000 people lost their jobs, and we are seeing tens of thousands of people lose their jobs in Britain every week. The survey that you've quoted from the British Chamber of Commerce really just summarising what we've been hearing from the Bank of England, from the Office for Budget Responsibility, and the OECD, which is that firms are looking to get rid of staff. They're not doing so at the moment because of the furlough scheme, but even some of them, like the airlines, that have literally been battered due to COVID, they can't wait for the furlough scheme to end. They are getting rid of people now. Last week, the Chancellor did try and incentivise employees by offering them a £1,000 bonus for every furloughed employee that they bring back. But for some companies, that just isn't enough. The British Chamber of Commerce did also say that this survey and the result that they received from the survey about redundancies is the biggest mass call for redundancies that they have on record. And I believe their records go back to 1989.
In the meantime, Swiss bank UBS finds that more than 3/4 of the world's richest people have reported an increase in their already vast family fortunes, despite the economic shock caused by the coronavirus pandemic. Yesterday, we talked about the call for a wide-ranging review of capital gains tax in the UK. What is the discussion around this latest report?
Well, it's just confirmation that the rich get richer during a pandemic like this. And we're not talking about the rich, actually. We're talking about the super wealthy. Swiss bank UBS, they manage the wealthiest families' fortunes in the world. And what they've revealed is that over the past 3 months, so whilst a lot of people are losing their jobs and spending less money, the wealthy are taking advantage of mass sell-offs in shares and indices across the world. There's been a huge rout, taking money from one place, putting it in another place, and that's what the billionaires have been doing. And they've been gaining money on this, which is no surprise to anybody, really. The Swiss banks say that this is mainly familiar in Asia territories, not so much in Europe and in North America. Just to your point of the capital gains tax, yes, it was announced yesterday that the Treasury are looking to review the tax. There has been lots of talk in the UK because the government are spending so much money on trying to preserve jobs that there will be a tax rise sometime next year. The capital gains tax is said to be on the chopping block first, but a source from the Treasury said that's absolutely not the case, that they're only reviewing the capital gains tax because they're not sure it's fit for purpose.
And Boohoo is on the headlines again as the fashion retailer has been criticized by the chair of an influential committee of MPs who said the online fashion firm had failed to address warnings of malpractice at Leicester factories. Shares in the company slipped another 3% on Wednesday, making a 46% drop since the allegations of malpractice. What is happening to the shares this morning?
Well, shares are still low. I believe this morning they opened up, they're on the AIM, the AIM index, just underneath the FTSE 250. I think their shares were down about 0.2%. But as you said, they've taken a complete battering. Half of their market value, worth over £1 billion, has been wiped off because of this scandal. And yesterday, the co-founder of Boohoo, Carol Kane, she was being questioned by the chairman of the Environmental Audit Committee, a select committee, a group of MPs that basically question major issues that is going on that has public interest. And what they were really saying is that they are absolutely amazed at Boohoo's alleged allegations that they had no idea of what was happening in Leicester, because apparently for several years now, MPs as well as organisations have informed Boohoo about some of the malpractices that have been going on in Leicester's factories, not just in Leicester, in other parts of the country as well. So they said they should reflect on that statement. Of course, shareholders are not happy. There's a lot of civil unrest going on in the world at the moment. And the fact that Britain, one of the wealthiest countries in the world, could be using people as modern slaves, particularly a brand such as Boohoo, really popular with celebrities, is just not sitting well with some of the celebrities that endorse the brand, with, of course, the shareholders and now the MPs. The Home Secretary, Priti Patel, has asked for an independent inquiry, and Boohoo have also said they are conducting their own inquiry. We're not expecting initial findings from that until the end of September.
Okay, Juliana, we'll get back to you later in the day for more updates.
Thank you.
And back here, Temple is still on board.
Oh, yes. Thank you so much, Chimize. So let's look at the debt and currency side of the market. Yesterday, we had 30 deals. It was a bullish day again at the bond side of the market. We've been seeing some profits taken lately. Again, prices have been rising in this space. We got the 20th of the 26th paper here for January 2022, 2026. At 124 naira 80 kobo. Let's look at the NCB side of the market. Here we saw a bullish performance in terms of rates yesterday. We had just one deal, 1 billion naira across the 1st of October 2020. That's at the shorter end of the curve. And of course, we know the rates cleared lower to 1.5% this side on this side of the market. Almost side of things, we have 25 deals yesterday. That's aside from all of those papers that you have here. This particular paper enjoyed some buy interest yesterday. That's the 22nd of October 2020, the shorter end of the curve, and that's some 4 billion naira worth of transactions. We have Ijoma Onwukwe joining us now. She is a fixed income dealer with FSDH Merchant Bank. Thank you, Ijoma, for joining us on the program. Yesterday we had primary market auction where some bills were rolled over. Can you tell us what the outcome of that auction was? What was rates like?
Okay, thank you, Temple. Good morning, and thank you for having me on your show. The DMO rolled over 107 billion at the PMA yesterday, with rates, with stock rates printing lower across the three standard tenors. The 91-day paper dipped by 490 basis points to close at 1.3%. The 182-day paper dipped by 11 basis points to close at 1.8%. While the 364-day paper dipped marginally by 4 basis points to close at 3.35%. The auction was oversubscribed as expected, with subscription level at about 176%. Today, we expect demand to flow into the secondary market, and rates should remain depressed in the near term.
Okay, so everyone is waiting for the third quarter calendar from DMO in terms of bond issuance, and of course, we have some 40 billion naira worth of coupon payments coming on board. That will, how will all of that shape the system liquidity, and what's your expectation from the DMO calendar?
The DMO just released the calendar this morning.
Okay. Looks like we lost that connection. Well, basically, we just heard from her that the debt management office has just released the calendar for bond issuance. That's for the third quarter of the year. Perhaps when we all digest that paper, that document, we will know what direction the DMO is heading in the third quarter of the year, and of course, perhaps for the second half of the year. Of course, we also know that some bond payments, bond coupon repayments are coming on board. I think sometimes either today or tomorrow, some 40 billion naira worth of coupon payments. That should also shape system liquidity. I mean, that's what analysts have put out there. But basically, the NBS, National Bureau of Statistics, has also just mentioned this morning that the inflation numbers will be out tomorrow, 17th of July, by 8:30 a.m. Those are some of the economic indicators that we'll be tracking for you here on Business Morning. Back to you, Chimize.
Absolutely. We'll track that, Temple.
Sure.
Thank you. All right. And that's it on the program. Thank you for watching. I'm Chimize Obi Iwago.